Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you are all about music, you're going to want to subscribe to this channel below so you don't miss out on an episode as we're now daily. Also, if you want to help us continue to curate the history of these artists and their amazing songs, click on our Patreon link below. That really helps us. All right, it's time for another episode of Number One in Our Hearts, where of course we celebrate a song that should have been a number one hit on the Hot 100, but for various reasons it came up short. But in our hearts and in our minds, it is number one with a bullet. 1979 and 1980 were an emotional roller coaster for ACDC. In the span of 12 months, the group experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. A tremendous high point was in July of 79 when the band released the album Highway to Hell. AC/DC was poised for a huge commercial breakout after the success of Highway to Hell. Prior to its release, the band had not received much airplay in America, and their US label Atlantic Records really gave them paltry marketing support. Actually, they rejected their 76 album Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap for domestic release. The decision to bring on Mutt Lange as producer for Highway to Hell was seen as the missing ingredient to getting the radio play that they were severely lacking. AC/DC brothers Angus and Malcolm Young were angry about the label's position. They felt that Atlantic was being disrespectful to their older brother George, who had co-produced their previous albums with Harry Vanda. Not to mention that Angus and Malcolm Young didn't respond well to being told what to do by anybody. Needless to say, it was a sticky situation. The band ultimately acquiesced to make Lange the producer, and of course Mutt Lange did his usual wizardry, helping the band create catchier, more accessible songs for radio airplay. The plan worked as Highway to Hell became AC/DC's bestseller in the US, and Mutt was retained for the next album, the band's 8th studio record, which was to be Back in Black. Then the roller coaster fell to the band's nadir in February 1980 when their beloved and rebellious frontman, Bon Scott, was found dead in the back of a friend's car in London after a heavy night of partying. The official cause of Scott's death was classified as alcohol poisoning and death by misadventure. The loss of Bon Scott was devastating, to say the least, and the band seriously contemplated breaking up. They had lost not only their charismatic frontman, but also their primary lyricist over 7 studio albums. Bon's close friends and family, particularly Bon's father, strongly encouraged the band to find a new lead singer and to forge ahead. Bon's father said that it would be what Bon would have wanted. The band decided that they would actively pursue a new singer following Bon's funeral. The auditions began to find a replacement for Bon Scott, and there were some notable candidates that vied for the gig, including Noddy Holder from Slade, who reportedly was offered the job and turned it down. During the auditions, Malcolm and Angus remembered Bon mentioning a singer that he was really impressed with named Brian Johnson, who was the frontman of a band called Geordie that he saw perform in London in the mid-70s. Bon Scott told the brothers that he saw this guy, Brian Johnson, and how great he was. He described watching him, just kind of going at it on the stage floor, kicking and screaming while the crowd was going nuts. Brian Johnson remembered the night when Bon saw him perform very well because the reason that he was on the floor of the stage wasn't part of the act. It was because he was suffering from a vicious appendicitis attack, and rather than rushing off the stage to a hospital like most of us or any other performer would have done, Johnson kept singing, essentially wailing in agony. Bon was also inspired when he saw Johnson put Geordie guitarist Vic Malcolm on his shoulders and carry him through the audience before he would be up on the floor screaming. Bon borrowed Brian's antics as he hoisted Angus on his shoulders during subsequent AC/DC concerts. It seemed that there was serendipity at work with Brian Johnson and AC/DC for a long time there. All of the remaining AC/DC crew and producer Mutt Lange wanted Brian to be their new lead singer. To Brian's surprise, they offered him the gig and he happily accepted. The band made the official announcement on April 1st, 1980, that Brian Johnson was the new lead singer of AC/DC. The band's bumpy ride reached its pinnacle in July 1980 when they released Back in Black, a historic LP that not only overtook Highway to Hell as the band's best-selling album, it would go on to become the second biggest-selling album of all time, selling an estimated 50 million copies around the world, second only to Michael Jackson's Thriller. With Mutt Lange at the helm of the album, it was meticulously produced. Mutt Lange's attention to detail and his perfectionism, if you will, is of course the stuff of legend. I was interviewing Jerry Harrison, who at the time was with Talking Heads recording in the same studio when Back in Black was being done. Here's what he said.
Mutt Lange was recording Back in Black in the next studio. And I believe that we did all of the basic tracks in 3 weeks for Remain in Light. And they did one vocal and one guitar solo in that period of time.
Oh, that's a great story right there.
And it was also all the guys at ACDC. We had discovered how much we liked snorkeling, and we invited them to come with us, and they went, "Sharks, we're not going in the water." And none of them would even put a toe in the water.
The first single from Back in Black with Brian Johnson as lead vocalist was You Shook Me All Night Long. And just like the suspicious circumstances of Bond's death, there was controversy surrounding the origin of the song. Officially credited as a co-write between Angus, Malcolm, and Brian, many people claim the song's lyrics were primarily written by Bon Scott, especially the double entendres that were trademarks of Bond's writing style. The first mention of You Shook Me to Brian was when Angus and Malcolm excitedly presented a tune that they were working on called You Shook Me All Night Long. The brothers had the title and the chorus, and it was inspired by, I guess, scantily clad women on the beaches of the Bahamas, where the band was recording Back in Black. Brian came up with the first verse of the song.
She was a fast machine, she kept another with me. Was the best damn woman that I've ever seen.
I guess the lyric reflects Brian's personal perspective of the analogy of women and cars. This, of course, has been mentioned many times in rock and roll. As he would say, they go fast, then let you down, and then you're happy again when you discover a new model. Regardless of who ultimately created the lyrics of the song, You Shook Me All Night Long, it's just one of the most undeniable jams of all time. It's the ultimate party tune that creates an uncontrollable urge to rock. This song and many others by ACDC, truly the definition of rock and roll. And it's been borrowed 100 times since. And although there will only be one Bon Scott, the vocal performance by Brian Johnson on You Shook Me All Night Long effectively began his legacy as one of the most distinctive rock vocalists of all time. I mean, how many iconic bands on their peak, on their way to their peak, really could survive losing their legendary frontman and keep rising after that? I mean, the only band that pulled it off besides AC/DC that I can think of is Van Halen when David Lee Roth left and Sammy came in. Brian continued AC/DC's epic legend. This song represents superior musicianship across the board. As irresistible as You Shook Me All Night Long is to generations of music fans, it barely broke the Billboard Hot 100. It stalled at number 35. And like me, you're probably thinking, how is that possible? Well, consider these factoids. With all the classic songs that AC/DC has given us to rock out to, their highest charting single on the Billboard Hot 100 is Money Talks, and that peaked at number 23. Back in Black only went to number 37, and Thunderstruck didn't even make it on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, as the 80s rolled along, harder rock started to take over the mainstream, like when Def Leppard took several singles to the top 10 when they released Hysteria. And of course, Guns N' Roses took Sweet Child of Mine to number 1, while at the same time, Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and many others were dominating the Hot 100. I think if You Shook Me All Night Long would have come out in 1988, 1989, a bit after that, I think it would have been right there. AC/DC was like contraband for me as a kid. I mean, I had this cassette and I played it loud, along with Megadeth and Ozzy. And I remember my dad took my cassettes away all the time because my mom would say, "Our son is playing devil music." Now, you have to remember that this was around the peak of the satanic panic of the 80s, when parents were afraid that if their kids were exposed to this kind of music, or if they played Dungeons and Dragons, that they would start worshiping the devil and sacrificing small animals or what have you. This was, of course, before the internet, and information was not accessible, leading to a lot of not only urban legends, but crazy rumors. I remember people would say at school, ACDC stands for Antichrist Devil Cult or Devil's Children, which of course was just ridiculous. I think part of it stemmed from the serial killer Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, and that rumor that he used to listen to the AC/DC song Night Prowler before his crimes. Angus Young has conveyed many times that AC/DC has always been about rebellion, not Satan. Back to my dad. He was always cool, even when we weren't getting along. I remember he told me where he hid my tapes that he was pressured to take away by my mom. I remember he said, those tapes may or may not be in my top dresser drawer underneath my socks. He said, if you do happen to listen to AC/DC or Megatron, again, turn it down so your mom doesn't hear. AC/DC and Megatron. My dad got heavy metal mixed up with the Transformers. Anyway, so I had to settle for listening to You Shook Me All Night Long on my Walkman. And although the song was not a huge hit as a single in 1980, You Shook Me All Night Long will always be number one in our hearts and much bigger than its chart position. By the way, the week that You Shook Me All Night Long peaked at number 35 on the Hot 100. The number one hit of that week was Barbra Streisand's A Woman in Love. And the week before that, Queen was at number one with Another One Bites the Dust. Now, I don't mean to rewrite history here, but I think Queen, followed by AC/DC at the number one position on the American Billboard Hot 100, would have been all right with me. How about you all? I think you'd agree. Brian Johnson, Angus Young, Chris Slade, Stevie Young. Love you guys. Malcolm Young and Bon Scott, we miss you, our brothers in rock and roll. And with that, for this band, AC/DC, that was always about to rock, we salute you. God bless AC/DC, man.
You got me shaking and you set me all night long.
To hear this perfect song, click on the curated playlist below. Leave us a comment on this tune and this legendary band. What other songs should we cover here? You can tell us that as well. Also, celebrate AC/DC the right way. Click on our link below to get Back in Black on vinyl and other merch by AC/DC. If you like our content, subscribe. Also, share it with others. Last of all, hit us up on Patreon. Be a part of keeping the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. For those about to rock, you know what the end is.